Welcome back to SeekerNewsTV. I'm John Warner, glad to be with you again. Thanks for tuning in. Last time we discussed science as a way of learning about human origins, and today I want to follow up on the subject of science, making a few additional points and then discuss some pros and cons of both science and philosophy as methods of acquiring spiritual truth. Alright, so again, this is for all you seekers out there who care about spiritual truth. You're searching for answers, the big questions of life, and you're willing to work hard to go after that, and you care about the methods used to go about doing that, and which methods are reliable and which methods are not. And that's kind of what we're talking about, how to go about acquiring spiritual truth. Alright, but before we jump into that, I want to again invite you to participate in our discussions by sending your questions about Christianity to seektv@gmail.com. Again, that's seektv@gmail.com. If there's been a lingering question or concern that you want an answer to, write us and we'll discuss it on the program, and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can, as soon as I get those questions from you in my inbox. So again, I just want to invite you to participate. This program is for you all out there, so let's have an inspiring discussion about these things and see what we can learn. Alright, so let's talk about science. Last time we talked about the philosophical underpinnings of science as it relates to discovering human origins, and we discussed some problems with uniformitarianism, if you'll remember. If not, please just go back and scroll through those videos and see what we had there to discuss. But I want to talk right now about science. Before we get into philosophy, I just want to briefly touch on science in general as a way to acquire spiritual truth. Now, what do I mean by spiritual truth? Well, spiritual truth can be thought of in many different ways. What I'm talking about specifically right now is metaphysical truth. Okay, so those things that go beyond our physical experience. So how does science rate as a method of acquiring truth of that nature? Well, science by its very nature deals with our physical experience. It deals with the physical world. Alright? So spiritual truth, thought of as metaphysical truth, is different. So by its very nature, science doesn't really have a lot to offer us in regards to metaphysical truth, okay, or even physical truths that are beyond our experience or possible realm of experience. Okay, so think of things like the existence of heaven and hell. Right? What can science tell us about that? Well, not much. I mean, we could hope to, we could think that maybe one day science will give us the answers to those things. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not going to hold my breath hoping that science will one day do that. First of all, I don't think we have a lot of time. Secondly, I don't think science has a great track record in discovering those kinds of truths. So the existence of heaven and hell is one example. How about the efficacy of Christ's blood for our salvation? So there's a Christian program, and we're talking about the Christian teaching and the Christian worldview and the claims that the Bible makes. Well, when we ask ourselves, does Christ's sacrifice, does His blood atone for our sins, bring us forgiveness, justify us before God? This is a metaphysical proposition. This is a metaphysical claim. This is not something that science really has a lot to say about. So, in And if we care about the answer to that question, and many of us do because it has significant ramifications for our lives and the lives of our loved ones, if we care about the answer to that question, then we need to find a reliable method to go about acquiring the truth about that claim. All right, so here's another one: the existence of spirits, or the truth about the afterlife. So these are all examples, I think, and I think you'll agree, where science really just doesn't have a lot to say. I mean, regarding the afterlife, there have been experiments done and things like this, and testimonials. However, the research and the conclusions are spotty and interesting, no doubt, very interesting, but again, inconclusive. So, what does this tell us? Well, unfortunately, because of the nature of metaphysical subjects, science isn't very useful for them. So what this is telling us is that if we want to discover the truth about these things, we need to go about it in a different way. But what way? If not science, how? Well, some people think that philosophy is the way to go about it. So let's shift gears and talk about philosophy, and talk about philosophy as a way of acquiring spiritual truth or metaphysical truth. And you can think of it in terms of the subjects we just mentioned. So philosophy is a way of acquiring the truth about heaven and hell, the existence of spirits, the afterlife, the efficacy of Christ's blood, and so forth. Alright, so let's talk about philosophy. Now, in an Introduction to Philosophy course, if you go to university and take an Introduction to Philosophy course, one of the first things that they will teach you is the difference between what a philosophy as a method is and revelation, especially if you take a philosophy of religion course. So they want to distinguish between revelation and philosophy. So what is the difference? Well, there are two terms which they commonly use. One is a priori and the other is a posteriori. Now, a priori just basically means prior to. Prior to what? Well, commonly it's talked about in terms of prior to experience or before experience. Right? Well, where a priori is talked about in terms of after experience. Now, what does that mean? Well, a priori, or before experience, is often thought of as bottom up. So it's kind of like humanity or philosophers working their way to acquire spiritual truth or spiritual knowledge. Right? So armchair philosophy, right? So you sit down and you grab your coffee and you just think about it really, really hard, and this is without any outside information. It's just basically what human logic necessitates, that sort of thing. Well, with revelation, it's a posteriori. So you've got outside information, you've got experience coming into play, and it's thought of in terms of top down. So a priori is thought of bottom up, humanity, reaching for God to acquire truth of a spiritual nature. Revelation is thought of as God reaching down, imparting knowledge, spiritual truth to humanity. So generally, that's what we're talking about. But before we get into the pros and cons of philosophy as a way of acquiring spiritual truth, let's be very clear about what Christianity teaches about this. So historical Christianity, what does it say about the use of philosophy and human effort and human knowledge and wisdom in acquiring spiritual truth, as opposed to revelation.